In October 2024, something came up on Tubi that made 2 million people stop scrolling. This video was kept in studio archives for more than 40 years. The network said it was too emotional to show on TV. Red had turned his last show into a place to confess. He talked to the camera as if it were his therapist. He talked about family tragedies, lying about his job, and failures in his own life. People remarked it felt like reading a journal. The question is, why did they ultimately decide to let it out? Red Skelton was born on July 18, 1913, in a little hut in Vincennes, Indiana. His father died of heart failure at the age of 37, only 2 months before Red was born. His dad was a clown in the Hagen-Beck-Wallace circus, but the happiness he offered to others never made it home. Red's mother had to raise 4 boys on her own when he died. They lost their little store and had to depend on their friends and charity to stay alive. Red wore torn clothes, went to bed hungry, and had to deal with being the poorest student in school. But he learned early on that a well-timed laugh might make anything easier. He used comedy as a shield, not to impress, but to stay alive. That hunger persisted with him, changing not just his face, but also his voice, his timing, and his truth. Red sold newspapers for 3 cents on street corners when he was 7. To make more sales, he told jokes. Sometimes he sung, sometimes he begged, and occasionally he swept. By the time he was 10, he was already working many jobs, delivering ice, lugging cigars, washing laundry, and going vast distances simply to make a few pennies. He watched mothers sell their wedding rings to get money for bread. He observed kids go to school without shoes on. His own education was uneven, with breaks and shifts getting in the way. But he remembered every minute he spent laughing with people he didn't know. People in town knew him not for his grades, but for how he could make a man with a broken back giggle like a child. When he was 10, he ran away with a medical show. He worked with Doc Ari Lewis throughout the summer, selling bogus cure-all bottles for $10 a week. He was just 8 years old and slept in barns and wagons, yet he sent every dollar home to his mother. One night, he fell off the stage and broke a glass case. People laughed. Red then understood that mistakes may be magical if you let them. He worked at the medical show for 4 years, learning stunts, jokes, accents, juggling, pantomime, and other skills that he would use for the rest of his life. He learned how to be impoverished without being angry, how to work without getting praise, and how to laugh for no reason. He never saw his dad. There were only stories left. They used grease paint and tiredness to paint a man. A man who fell down too young because life took more from him than it provided. But Red held on to those stories like they were holy. He looked for a father he had never met in every circus tent he passed, in every mirror he looked into in a dressing room. That ache stayed with him when the nights were cold and there was no more laughter. He once remarked that his comedy was only an effort to get back what he had lost at home. Everything he did was influenced by that wound. He quit school when he was 15. He had $135 in his pocket and a vague promise from a burlesque performer in Chicago. He hitchhiked out of Vincennes with a suitcase, a dream, and the memory of his mother's gentle nod. She never told him to stop. She knew that some youngsters sprint towards something because they know what it feels like to be left behind. Red grabbed every job he could get. He worked through the Great Depression like a man racing a clock, from circuses to nightclubs, backrooms to streets. He began touring with the Hagen-Beck-Wallace circus by the time he was 16. This was the same circus his father used to walk. He didn't just fit in with the large top. He took a breath of it. The sawdust, the perspiration, the dread, and the quiet before the punchline. That's when Red stopped being amusing. That's when he became real. He played the drums in a silent vaudeville show called The Merry Mutes. Red couldn't talk on stage when he was only 16. Instead, he acted, danced, squinted, slid, and fell. He mimicked animals. He imitated actors. He replicated suffering. He made $5 a week. But what he discovered was worth more. He learned how strong silence, a stare, and a stumble can be. His look showed all he couldn't say as a kid. He could make people feel things without saying a word. He and Bud Jones introduced words to their act by 1931. Red did imitation of Clark Gable that made people laugh. They were making $75 a week, which was unheard of during the Great Depression. But Bud cheated, and the act fell apart. Red was quite sad. He lost not only a job but also a beat. He got jobs at dance marathons, walkathons, and anything else. There was sadness on and off stage. But after that breakup, he met Edna Stillwell, a theater usher who could write a punchline sharper than most men on the radio. In 1934, they got married. She was 13 years old. He was 21 years old. Edna, on the other hand, was good at business and funny writing. They worked together to make Guzzler's Gin, a skit about a drunk man who hides his booze from his wife. The crowds loved it. Clubs in Chicago began to call. That drawing was the way in. Edna got Red gigs, composed songs, and pushed him more than anyone else ever has. By 1937, they were making $2,000 a week. People filled the Chicago Civic Opera House just to see his rubber-faced falls and Edna's fiery preparations. But their marriage started to fall apart behind the scenes. As Red climbed, their link broke more and more. Red took a chance in 1937 and joined a radio show called The Avalon Time. He made up a rustic bumpkin named Clem Cattlehopper who spoke slowly. That one character made a big difference. People loved him. The ratings went up by 30%. Cadil Hopper merchandise was being sold in stores by 1938. The kids copied what he said. The parents laughed too. He had made something that America needed. Funny yet not mean. Being innocent without being dumb. A character that made you feel comfortable and goofy at the same time. Red earned his own show on NBC in 1941. The Red Skelton Show had 20 million listeners per week. Each episode was only 15 minutes long, but he filled them with a lot of voices, characters, and routines. Willie Lump Lump, Jr., the bad little kid. A sketch following a sketch. People wanted more. But all that success came with a cost. Red worked all the time. He wrote, played, rewrote, and worried until one night in 1943, during a live broadcast, he fell. He felt he heard his father's voice say, "Keep going." He couldn't breathe or stand, so they took him off stage and stopped the show. The doctors claimed it was tiredness. Red said it was the worst time of his life. But when he came back, his jokes were darker and deeper. There was something different about the way he spoke now. The cruel little kid became one of his most renowned performances. A brat with a sharp tongue and a sense of humor. People in the audience laughed, but not everyone did. The FCC began sending out warnings. Parents said it was too violent and too obscene. But Red didn't mind. He thought that comedy should tell the truth, even if it was messy or made you feel bad. The argument only made him more famous. Kids talked about the sketches. People complained quietly, but no one turned off the radio. Red was making $10,000 a week by 1944. That was a lot of money for a movie star. That was money for a mansion. But Red had a flaw. He took a chance. In one night in Las Vegas, he lost $50,000 all at once. That was all he had. No longer there. He sat at the table with empty eyes. No more jokes. Friends sought to lend a hand. Edna tried to talk sense into Red, but he remained looking for the same joy he got from laughing, danger, luck, and timing. He had to work for years to get out of that hole. His fame was still growing, but his financial account was a caution to all comedians: if you don't know when to walk away, applause won't pay the bills. Red Skelton's ascension at MGM began quietly in 1940, but it didn't stay that way for long. A talent scout from the studio heard him do his famous acts on the radio and signed him right away. His debut movie, Flight Command, didn't get much attention. But all changed when he came to Dr. Kildare's wedding in 1941. He shot a drunk scene in a pantomime in just 2 days, and that made the whole movie feel like it was his. Lou, the real star, later remarked that Red stole the show. The spectators didn't just laugh, they came back. MGM saw it right away. They began to cast him in whatever they could think of, betting that even a bad script would be good if Skelton was in it. He had moved from radio to movies. And in less than a year, he wasn't simply getting by at MGM. He was one of the most famous people on their lot. In 1943, Red got his own full-length comic lead role in Whistling in Brooklyn. And the box office didn't wait. Back then, the movie made $2.5 million, which is more than $40 million now. He played a detective who also loved baseball, and the mix of sports, mystery, and clowning seemed like it was built specifically for him. Some of the jokes employed stop-motion effects, which were not common at the time, although the audience didn't know this. He even got help from a Disney expert to timing the moves. The combination of Skelton's muscular rhythm and these new visual gimmicks made some parts of the movie unforgettable. And just like that, Red wasn't simply MGM's funny man. He was one of their most creative stars. But just a year later, while he was making Bathing Beauty in 1944, Skelton heard something that would change his life forever. Richard, his baby son, had leukemia. He didn't tell anyone at the studio. He was the same old Red on camera. Crew members occasionally saw him crying alone in corners while the cameras weren't rolling. He kept filming. The movie went well, but he still felt sad. Richard died in 1958 when he was only 9 years old. Red claimed it made everything different. His work became more thoughtful. He began to pay more attention to charity. He started to pay greater attention to hospitals for kids. The funny clown had something deep behind those eyes that made people chuckle. Something that would always be with him. The Fuller Brushman came out in 1948 and sold more than 15 million tickets around the world. It should have been the best time of his life as a movie star. People laughed so hard at his character, a fumbling but endearing door-to-door salesman, that cinemas had to play sequences again to let the hilarity settle. But Red wasn't happy. MGM placed him under a strict contract. They made him work through sickness, sadness, and everything else. He later alleged they never let him breathe. There was actual laughing on film, but behind it was someone who was being pushed too far. He masked his own pain behind deadlines, ticket sales, and contracts. He was nominated for a Golden Globe for The Yellow Cabman in 1950. It felt like recognition, but there was another war going on behind it. He wanted to create his own characters and write his own stories. That wasn't what MGM wanted. They wanted him to do what they said. He turned down a role in 1951. He was put on hold by the studio. It was in the news. During this time, actors didn't fight studios, but Red did. He claimed he didn't want to be a fool. He wanted people to regard him as an artist. The way he stood up for himself changed how stars were handled. His name was big enough to go against the system. And it worked. After that, TV appeared. About 30 million people watched the first episode of The Red Skelton Show on September 30, 1951. It was a great night. Live music, mime routines, and army jokes. People couldn't believe it was all happening in real time. It was one of the first shows to be shown across the country using a new coaxial cable technology. He earned 2 Emmys the next year. CBS tried to get him to tone it down by stating his comedy was too graphic, but the crowd didn't care. The show became a regular thing. It wasn't just a performance. It happened. Freddie the Freeloader, a small figure, came out in 1952. A homeless person with a limp, a smile, and a heart. He felt warm because of Red. He said that someone he met when he was down and out in Chicago gave him the idea. People loved Freddie, even if he didn't talk much. They thought he could help them. The character was more well-known than some Hollywood stars by 1953. Freddie showed that a hobo with good timing could win over a country that was used to polished humor. But in 1957, Red's life fell apart. Edna, his wife and manager, admitted to having an affair with his producer. Red lost it. He shattered his hand when he punched a wall in a hotel. He missed 2 episodes. It became a scandal because of the news. Fans were shocked. Red had always seemed like the kind of guy who liked to be with his family. He was married again after a few months. But the harm was done. His picture had changed. The show went down for a bit, but it didn't end. The crowd still wanted to laugh every week, even if they knew the man behind it was in pain. Red added another character in 1958, George Appleby, the henpecked husband. Some nights, he received up to 40 million viewers, which was a lot. George was a sad sack who had to deal with smog, nagging, and a world that didn't listen. It was all a joke, but there was some truth behind it. Skelton's voice started to go out from years of smoking, so he started to do more pantomime. Do more and talk less. His physical comedy got better. It wasn't a flaw. People watched because of it. He transferred his show to CBS in 1962 and earned an Emmy for writing. He made fun of the suburbs, himself, and the world. But the network sought more of an advantage. Jokes about divorce and politics. Skelton fought back. He wasn't a comic book rebel. He wanted people to laugh, not get into trouble, but he tried. His drawings started to walk a finer line between being funny and serious. That Emmy wasn't merely a prize. It changed the tone of his voice. He was still the clown, but now he had something to say. By 1965, he had reached his peak. Every week, 50 million people watched. John Wayne came on to help the ratings. Skelton created parodies of westerns and brought back old routines, but the public wanted color TV. At first, he didn't want to do it since he thought it was a trick. In the end, he gave in. That same year, he showed a retrospective with Wayne and his best-known sketches. The scrapbook episode was one of his most popular. He was still on top, even if new comedians with stronger voices were coming up behind him. CBS opted to move on in 1969. The Skelton Show was still popular, but the network wanted to follow youth culture. They put edgy variety performances in his place. Red went to NBC for one last season. His last concert was on May 19, 1971. He said farewell tenderly in the end. The laughter stopped, but the love stayed. That last show wasn't merely a way to say farewell. It was the end of a time. The IRS came knocking 2 years later, in 1973. He owes $1.2 million in overdue taxes. Poor management and unwise investments. He had to sell his Palm Springs home when he was 60. He got back on the road and played live acts in casinos to pay off his debt. He played for people who remembered the good old days. The glitz was gone, but the work was still there. His struggle to stay alive made the news. He was working hard behind the painted smile. Then, in 1976, he came back. NBC gave him a few specials called Funny Faces. He brought back Clem Cadillhopper and made the sketches better. They sold successfully in syndication, bringing him $500,000 and helped him get back on his feet. The old ways still operated. The crowd still laughed. Clem still had it. Red started painting after his second wife, Georgia, died that same year. He painted more than 500 oil portraits, most of them were of his characters. He had an exhibit in Las Vegas in 1980. He sold 200 paintings for $5,000 each. There were a lot of people in the gallery. It wasn't just about the cash. He painted to deal with his grief and stay alive. People felt the same compassion in his art that they saw on their televisions. Things got shaky again in 1981. Red collapsed backstage following a show at the Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas, where he was the headliner. He had started drinking again. That night, I almost perished. Friends were afraid. The stage used to be his medicine, but now it was making him tired. He still came back. Not because he had to, but because he couldn't not do it. He shot Freddy the Freeloader's Christmas Feast for HBO later that year. It came out on December 13, 1981, with Vincent Price and Imogene Coca. The plot was easy to follow. Freddy only wanted to eat with a friend. It only cost $200,000 to make the special, yet 5 million people watched it. It was calm, peaceful, and full of love, just like him. He made additional crazy expressions alongside French mime great Marcel Marceau in 1982. They fought for 30 minutes with silent jokes. Vandals ruined Richard's grave right before it was filmed. Red didn't say much, but he was in pain. He didn't miss a beat on stage. He acted out, smiled, and made the crowd forget. That's what he had always done. In 1983, Funny Faces 3 came out. That year, Skelton told folks something that very few people knew. He enlisted in June 1944 and performed for soldiers in Europe for 18 months. He did shows during blackouts, made people laugh in bomb shelters, and was on Armed Forces radio. Nobody knew. He had kept it a secret, but suddenly it was out and people saw the clown in a different way. He was more than just amusing. He had served without making a fuss. That same year, on July 18, he played for Queen Elizabeth II at Royal Albert Hall in London. It was his 70th birthday. In memory of his father, he recounted stories, drew pictures, and even played the drums. It was shot for HBO and shown in 1984. It cost the usual $200,000, but the hall was full with laughing that night, just like it always was. The royal family laughed with the rest of us. Around 5 million people watched each of his farewell specials, which cost roughly $200,000. They were shot in Toronto and shown on HBO. Big heart, simple productions. The Christmas meal and Royal Command performance of Freddy the Freeloaders were the best parts. Red Skelton's life was full of laughing, but beneath the red nose and painted smile was a guy who knew more about heartbreak than most people would ever guess. When he divorced Edna Marie Stillwell in 1957, the news hardly brushed the surface. She was more than just his wife. She had been his boss, his writer, and his guide. Their daughter Valentina was only 10 years old when she became the center of a storm that neither parent could control. Edna said Red was distant. Red said Edna made their daughter hate him. The court picked Edna. Red cried in front of everyone in court. Some days he wore clown makeup to attempt to remind everyone that he was still a father. People thought it was just a publicity gimmick, but it wasn't. He could only talk through the noise this way. In May 1958, only a few months later, his 9-year-old son Richard was diagnosed with leukemia. Doctors couldn't do anything. Red and his wife Georgia stayed at UCLA Medical Center to watch over Richard as his body got weaker. The youngster died on May 10, only a few days before his 10th birthday. Red ended his show. Johnny Carson took over his place on TV. Red ceased talking when the camera was off. By 1961, grief had taken over his life. He tried to kill himself by taking sleeping tablets. Doctors brought him back, but the part of him that danced freely never came back. From then on, he used all of his sadness to give him a reason to live. In 1963, he opened the Red Skelton Classic Learning Center to try to give other kids what he had lost. He married Lothian Toland in 1963. For 10 years, people whispered about how they had betrayed them. The marriage ended in 1971. Once more, Red was alone. In 1973, Georgia Davis came along, and for a while, things got better. But cancer killed her in 1976. He didn't say anything. He didn't show up in public. Red hardly ever left his residence for almost 3 years. There was no stage, no spotlight, no punchline, just silence and darkness. Red's car hit another car hard near Palm Desert on January 17, 1986. He was 73 years old and had 12 broken bones. His ribs were broken, his legs were broken, and his face was bruised and swollen. He was in the hospital for weeks. Then came the surgeries. He joked with the press, but he was scared it was over in private. He couldn't get up and walk for months. He wasn't able to work. He gently left the public eye, not out of anger, but to get away from it all. Doctors warned him his lungs were deteriorating by 1990. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. Too many years, too many cigarettes. He stopped right away. He stated it was the hardest thing he had ever done. He painted a lot in the last years of his life. Over 50,000 items. He sold them, gave the money to hospitals for kids, and allowed the art speak for him when he couldn't. Red Skelton passed away on September 17, 1997. But he still wasn't done at that point. At the 38th Primetime Emmys in 1986, Lucille Ball appeared in front of an audience in Pasadena and gave Red the Governor's Award. It had been 16 years since his show was canceled, yet people still remembered him. That same year, Ball State University gave him an honorary degree. A Screen Actors Guild Award came next in 1987. People started talking about him again. A group of people who had known him as a child rushed back. They remembered the voice, the face, and the anguish that was behind the smile. Interest was on the rise again by 1989. 3 episodes of The Red Skelton Show that were thought to be lost were found. In 1990, 16 more were included to a VHS package called The Lost Episodes. They were from private collectors, old station vaults, and areas that no one had looked in for decades. These weren't just repeats. People felt those moments would never come back. Red's habits, which had been quiet and grainy, were suddenly full of life. In 2013, Indiana found more than 200 hours of kinescopes that had never been shown on TV. The clips weren't what you would expect. These were sketches that were cut in the 1950s and routines on racism and civil rights that never broadcast. Skelton wrote them, fought for them, and then put them away when networks said no. Years later, they came back and showed the world another side of Red that didn't just juggle or mime, but also questioned and pushed. The Edna and Red Skelton collection now includes these reels. They were raw, political, and human. His paintings also wouldn't go away. In 2020, paintings depicting Freddy the Freeloader were selling for up as $1 million. The TV show he used to watch had turned into a fine art subject. Skelton began painting in the 1960s, and by the time he died, it was believed that he made more money from his paintings than from TV. The Skelton estate gave museums more than 1,000 pieces of art. The Red Skelton Museum created a gallery that cost $4 million. What used to be on the walls of his study was now on display. The man who painted to deal with his anguish had somehow painted himself into history. The Paley Center for Media told us something else in 2024. A bunch of outtakes and mistakes from his last TV show in 1971. It broadcast on August 1st of that year, ending its 20-year run on CBS. But this footage that wasn't shown shows something more personal. Behind-the-scenes laughs with Carol Burnett, missed lines, a crew that was laughing, and Red caught off guard in the middle of an emotional sequence. He never believed that kind of film would be shown. It became the center of future retrospectives. And then the most terrifying release of all arrived. In October 2024, Tubi showed the uncensored version of Red Skelton, the farewell specials. In the first week, more than 2 million people watched it. These were clips from the 1981 to 1982 season. Most of it had never been shown on TV. One scene, a 45-minute rendition of Freddy the Freeloader's Christmas dinner, showed footage that Skelton had cut from his own tapes. It wasn't simply acting. Red was in tears. Monologues came after the scripts ended. He talked to the camera like it was a place to confess. He talked of his father, Joe Skelton, who died in 1912 inside a circus tent, barely a month before Red was born. He said that Richard Jr. died in 1984. He said he never got over that loss. Some people had to stop watching. It felt too private, like reading someone's diary and hearing it talk. During the special, Skelton said something that no one saw coming. In 1929, when he was 16, he worked with the Hagen-Beck-Wallace Circus for 4 months. He admitted to stealing scripts, clown routines, physical gags, and plans for throwing pies in people's faces. He learned them by heart, line by line. He cried and laughed. If I hadn't stolen those scripts, I'd still be selling soap on the streets. The footage was restored in 4K. All of the subtle facial twitches and tiny hand movements in his pantomimes were preserved. The restoration team worked for more than a year, cleaning and stabilizing each frame. What was once dusty and dim became clean, sharp, and unforgettable. his shows made it into Tubi's top 10. Young people who had never heard of him before learned what he could do with silence and a painted smile.